Welcome all into another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer. That's Thomas Dunn. And we've got a lot to get into. We're going to obviously still continue to talk about the portal and some of the things that have been happening there, who's coming in. We've had some commits. We've also had a few other exits, some others who are still trying to maybe get a waiver or two to play an extra year. We saw a couple of those names pop out as well. And we'll get into all of that. Before we get going any further, be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you listen to the podcast. But we've got to start off with the big news that happened on Friday, and the press conference happened earlier today, is that UC Santa Barbara will be joining the West Coast Conference. That will begin the 27-28 season. They will become the 12th full member of the WCC. It's a return to the WCC for UC Santa Barbara, last in the league in 1969. This is also going to be the third school the WCC has added in the last 7 months. Of course, it's also not the only Big West team that has been added. UC San Diego is also going to be joining next season, or not this coming season, but obviously the following year, 27-28 as well. And, this one, it wasn't a total surprise, but I think maybe just that the talk had kind of calmed down a bit, that maybe this might have taken a little bit more time, but here we are, and the Gauchos are going to be joining the West Coast Conference.
And Zach Farmer will be joining the Thunderdome very shortly. I think the thing that stands out to me to start with is Stu Jackson, the WCC commissioner, has been very adamant and consistent about 12 teams. Like 12 has been the number. And you think of how they got together UC San Diego. You think of how they got Denver. And even going back to when they got Seattle U. Like there's been a slow but steady process because the President's Council has, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, not let the league off the hook and saying we're good here at this spot. It's be aggressive, be on the forefront, be a place that can offer a different type of opportunity. And doing so for a UC Santa Barbara athletic department that has a lot going for them, to be quite honest with you. A really solid year in, year out basketball team. Their baseball team is usually really good. The Big West as a whole is really good in baseball. The Big West is usually really good in volleyball. So, I mean, there's so many little different intricacies that take place at this, and acknowledging that basketball is the driver of the car, and rightfully so. But there was a lot that UC Santa Barbara had in terms of how good they had it in the Big West. And it'll be a really good competitive balance that they bring to the WCC, and the Gauchos. They're going to be a force to reckon with across a lot of different sports, including basketball.
I mean, you mentioned that the fact that they were good across all the sports. I mean, they were not this year, but last year they were the NCAA D1 AAA they won the all sport trophies, which means that they were the best across all the sports in Division I of the non-football school. So like, again, like you think about what UC Santa Barbara is capable of bringing to the table. It's a lot. They're going to be participating in all the WCC sports. They obviously, that is going to raise the profile of a number of those non-revenue sports, in addition to obviously basketball, which is the driver of the entire ship. And it's a Santa Barbara team that is always competitive, always kind of in the mix. Obviously, they faced off with a couple of WCC teams over the course of the non-conference this year. There was that the LMU Santa Barbara game is the one that jumps out at me even this past year, of those two just kind of going back and forth. And that was a fun game to watch at UC Santa Barbara. But yeah, like Stu Jackson talked about it, how like that this is an addition that raises the profile of everything. And it was obviously one of the teams that had been talked about after UC San Diego was added, that, well, does this mean that Santa Barbara or others are going to join the party? And here we are. They did add the one. It does sound like for now the aggressiveness is going to kind of take a step back, because 12 sounds like the number is what the President's Council wanted, and they have reached that number. it doesn't appear at the moment that there's going to be any movement in the opposite direction, at least for now, of seeing someone else leave at the moment. So the WCC is at 12. And you look at up and down who the 12 are. You think about, again, you mentioned the addition of Seattle U. You look at UC San Diego. You now have UC Santa Barbara. The WCC has positioned itself to really, again, and Denver as well, that they're positioning themselves in each of the major like focal points of the West Coast: San Diego, LA, the Central Coast, the Bay Area, Seattle, Portland, Denver. They've kind of checked off all those boxes, and this was one I thought that was the most appealing to me throughout the entire process. Outside of UC San Diego on the basketball front, across the board, like UC Santa Barbara was the one where I was like, if the WCC get one in this shuffling of everything, outside of like obviously like the pipe dream schools, this was the one that made so much sense.
There are a lot worse places to be than where the WCC's leverage is right now, and I think they've done a good job in trying to. You're not gonna create Gonzaga in the aggregate. I think that's you shouldn't be viewing it from this type of lens because they're on a different level, especially when it comes to men's basketball, what they brought to the table, what they have brought to the table, and what they will continue to do so off in the Pac-12. I don't think you're really trying to recreate the Zags, and we'll get to some comments relating to that later on. But still, I think when you look at the holistic value of what UC Santa Barbara brings to the table, I think there's so much good that the Gauchos bring that stands out more than anything. I'm just mad we're not going to get a Aiden Mahaney return game to St. Mary's like that. We were robbed of that. And we'll save that for a different time down the road. But that was just a funny footnote, all things considered, because the only peer really in UC Santa Barbara's space when it comes to I think what the WCC wants is UC Irvine. And right now, I mean, Irvine is content as can be in the Big West, and we'll see if that changes going forward. But I think in terms of the available options you had and how it was executed, I think the WCC is in a good spot. There were definitely options that were not as pristine as the Gauchos, and the Gauchos, I'm not so sure. I don't know how much you can really read into how hard the decision was in a press conference, so to speak, but I think it was a difficult decision that turned a little bit easier with how some of the dominoes were falling in the Big West.
Yeah, I think that was one of the components there because it had to be asked. What you look at the rest of what realignment is happening, and it's not like the Big West was kind of resting on its laurels because it was also it's adding Cal Baptist, adding Utah Valley. They were also not kind of resting on that. Because they were also losing UC Davis. They had already lost UC San Diego. Obviously, UC Santa Barbara is added to that list. This was a decision that UC Santa Barbara kind of had to look around at the total scope. And again, they're thinking about basketball as kind of that driver. And it did seem like that was one of the things. Now, I think one of the interesting notes that UC Santa Barbara Chancellor Dennis Asanis mentioned was that by moving to the WCC, they anticipated revenue levels will go up by 5 or 6. And now that is like a number, again, coming from the chancellor of UC Santa Barbara is an interesting note to bring up, that they anticipated that much of a leap from their Big West revenue to what they would make in the WCC. Now, again, that could be because of the existing brands that are in the WCC, regardless of Gonzaga being gone. Because again, like that was like both of us were in that press conference listening. I asked the question about Gonzaga, like, hey, it's like, because there's definitely been the conversation of like how much better of a conference is the WCC compared to the Big West if you don't have Gonzaga there. And their answer was clear. It's like this was the better conference, that this was a better opportunity for them. The revenue opportunity was better for them. And that says, I think, a lot about what might be happening behind the scenes with the WCC. Says a lot about, unfortunately, might be what's happening behind the scenes at the Big West as well. That this was an opportunity. Again, also wind the clock back. Apparently, the WCC and Stu Jackson had talked to UC Santa Barbara about a year ago, and that conversation went nowhere. Leadership changed. They went back to that conversation, and it was far more welcoming and clearly a result that the WCC is going to welcome with open arms.
It is, and I think if I'm not misremembering in a press conference within the last like year and change, Stu Jackson had mentioned like that they hadn't necessarily hit a roadblock, but they had to hit some challenges in trying to scout some of these new potential schools and new members. So you mentioned kind of that timeline and turnaround and getting the Gauchos in the building. I think it's important to like you kind of have to be cutthroat when it comes to realignment at this point. I think it helped that among the WCC leadership, it seems like they had smelt the blood in the water of, hey, UC Santa Barbara might be wanting something more, even after some of those talks had stalled out in different times. But I think holistically, this is pretty much as good as it gets in terms of poaching a new member. I know I keep saying it, but the value that you get across not only from basketball in a year in year out program under Joe Pasternak, like that's a team that arguably should have gone on a run in the 2021 NCAA tournament and has been close in most years since in the Big West tournament. You have that, and they hosted the 2024 Santa Barbara Regional in baseball. Like that was a damn good Gauchos. It takes a lot to do that, to be quite honest with you. And you just look at some of the other sports we talked about, water polo and all that. Like WCC is a pretty solid water polo conference. So it's not just basketball as much as we like to talk about it, and as much as we should talk about it. But at least to me, like I always will dive back to baseball when it comes to the Big West, and especially what UC Santa Barbara has given on with some of its pretty good teams over the years.
Now, do want to share a little bit about what's been going on. Obviously, during this press conference, we'll play a little bit of it here so that you can kind of hear from the UC Santa Barbara Chancellor Dennis Asanis, UC Santa Barbara Director of Athletics Kelly Barsky, and then of course WCC Commissioner Stu Jackson. So we'll play a little bit of that, and then we'll continue on the conversation about what we think could be, what this conference could look like. Obviously not this coming year, but in 2 seasons, what WCC basketball could end up looking.
No, I mean, we're excited again, regardless of who's leaving or changing or adjusting. I mean, it's sort of the landscape we've been navigating in Division I athletics for a number of years now. And so, like I said, under Stu's leadership, his staff in working with the institutions in the WCC, they're aligned commitment and investment. And that's really important that they have aligned commitment and investment to continue to grow the programs and create this wonderful, again, West Coast sort of dominance, I'd say, in terms of the markets in which they're in. So we think that hopefully, Santa Barbara strengthens the conference, but we're, again, humbled to be in with some really great institutions that are investing and aligning around competitive excellence, athletics excellence, and really creating excitement that we know Division I, athletics can bring to communities.
I might add that we respect Gonzaga, but in 5 years, we could be the next Gonzaga. I think we have all the elements. And think about the fans. Would they rather go to Spokane or would they rather go to Santa Barbara to spend a weekend? I'm just saying, again, we respect everybody.
I would just comment on the question, Zach, and it's a good one. What makes the West Coast Conference a bit unique than other conferences, or the one that you mentioned, has come true. As a conference, we historically at the WCC have had pretty darn good performance in men's and women's basketball. I mean, we've been a multi-bid conference for 10 of the last 12 years, 5 times on the women's side as well. But I always felt that what made this conference unique is the following. The West Coast Conference historically has had great success in Olympic sports as well. And the combination of being successful in the basketballs and Olympic sports truly makes this conference special, unlike any around the country. And it's starting to come to fruition. Having 12 members now, by adding the likes of UC San Diego and now especially with UC Santa Barbara, the depth and breadth of the strength of our conference has become very strong. And what that means to recruiting student athletes, what that means metrically to performance throughout all of your seasons, what that means in terms of your ability to access NCAA championships, I would match against anyone. Now listen, we are who we are. We're a mid-major conference. We're not the Power Four. But that doesn't mean that we can't have opportunities the same as they do with access to championships.
So there was a lot kind of in there. Obviously, we both kind of chuckled a bit because we heard the line from the Santa Barbara chancellor about in 5 years we could be the next Gonzaga. Which, all right, that might be a bit of the stretch and the overreach because Gonzaga is a wildly unique situation. But you know what? Hey, like someone has to be at some point, right? Someone has to be that school, and Santa Barbara has done a lot of things well over the years, and them joining the WCC is a step up from the Big West overall. And I admire the confidence in it and that they could become that team. And you know what? For any mid-major, you kind of have to at least have that mentality that that's what you could, that that's the goal. That is kind of the gold standard of what you want to try to be able to reach.
I mean, who are we to say they can't be the next Gonzaga? I mean, the other funny part of it about that was, oh yeah, who wants to go travel to Spokane? Like, come down to Isla Vista. I'm like, okay, you don't got to tell me twice, really. I love me, for those UC Santa Barbara Gauchos who end up watching this, I love me a good Deltopia weekend. All right, so there's so many different elements like towards this, and when you kind of look at the program building, you should be reaching for those stars to start with. I think in acknowledging, yes, some of the banter regarding that comment, that's the mentality UC Santa Barbara should have. They should want to come in here and take ownership and say, this is our conference to run. And, good luck, best of luck to them in doing so. But if you're not an athletic department, that's all the way in, especially when you're leaving home, then what are you doing? And I think UC Santa Barbara, from a mentality standpoint, misguided or not, that's exactly the type of aggressiveness that you need to have. I'm really intrigued to see how the Gauchos kind of apply themselves, especially as we enter this new rev share era and such, of how much support really is behind this athletic department. And I think that's a question somewhat that remains to be answered, but I think one that has a lot of intrigue more than anything.
Now, there were a couple of kind of more technical questions that were asked as far as oh wait, what about the schedule? What's that going to look like once there's 12 teams in the league? And it did seem like there's not going to be the movement, or at least it seems highly unlikely there'll be a movement toward 20 or a 22 game schedule, full round robin. That 18 still seems like the good number to be at, which honestly I still agree with. I think the 18's good because it still gives teams enough wiggle room to then work and have a good non-conference schedule. Still get enough opportunity to be able to build those up. The other one that I thought was interesting was the question about the WCC tournament and the future. Obviously, we know they'll be at the Orleans next season, but after that, it felt like Las Vegas was not necessarily a guarantee anymore. And while there was at least an openness and obviously WCC fans have enjoyed their time in Las Vegas over the last 17 years of it being at the Orleans, going into that, it made it sound like, well, they're leaving their options open, but that the options could also be moving to another location that is not Las Vegas.
I mean, you have to keep your options open in this day and age because so much changes in regards to the leverage, and we think back to when the Zags announced their departure, that the ticket sales would have to go up, the marketing would have to go up, like the onus would be on the conference to try and make up some of that gap, and acknowledging that it's going to be a tall mountain to climb. So, and think of it kind of like the parent argument of the WAC without Grand Canyon inside the Orleans. What do you want your product to look like? And I think that's kind of the question the WCC has to ask itself. And there are other solid options like in the area. I mean, I don't know where you fall on this Vegas Henderson argument, but if they want to do Lee's Family Forum, cool. I'm always I'm pro, even though it would be mass chaos in getting there, and I acknowledge the logistical problems. Give me Tahoe Blue Event Center in South Lake Tahoe. Let's go to Tahoe for for the madness. I would not mind that. You even have the new Grand Sierra Resort that they're building for the University of Nevada up in Reno. Maybe that becomes a consideration. Who knows? I doubt it just because it's Mountain West territory and such, but just keep your options out there, because think about Northern California and Southern California. There aren't necessarily a whole lot of options for these mid-sized neutral site arenas. Like, you're not going to go to Oracle. Like, that's too big as much as you may want to. Are you going to go to the SAP Center? That might be too big, too expensive. Where else do these dominoes kind of start to fall? Because you don't want, obviously, do you play in the Pyramid at Long Beach or something like that? I don't. There are options within like the Northern and Southern California sphere, but I just don't think that's going to be conducive to doing much. Now, if you look at some of those other outside the box ones that I mentioned, you could be playing with something here. But again, it's a difficult decision, and you have to keep all your options open, especially with the changing leverage.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one of the more fascinating looks to what the conference is going to look like a couple of seasons from now, is the dynamic of having two UC schools in the system, and what on a fan front that looks like, because obviously the two UCs are massively bigger than any of the WCC schools, and that is going to play a factor when it comes to conference tournaments, road exposure, whatnot. Because I'd make a pretty safe bet that UC San Diego is going to have enough people that are probably already in some of these major metro areas to go to those games, but then also good enough who will travel. Same goes for UC Santa Barbara, that there's going to be enough that are going to be able to kind of go to these existing WCC gyms and have a good showing. And I think it's going to, obviously, then on the flip side, the WCC's, I guess the legacy WCC schools, you can say, might have a little bit more of a challenge on that front, which I've always have had that challenge. But I don't think no one's gonna complain about a trip to Santa Barbara or a trip to San Diego. And it's, again, like, to the point of, like, would I rather go to Spokane or would I rather go to Santa Barbara? I think there's gonna be a lot more fans who are going to be like, that trip to Santa Barbara sounds really good, especially in January or February.
Well, then you actually have to get there, which is the other part of the
Wow.
discussion. And yeah, that's easier said than done at certain points. But overall, yes, I understand kind of what everyone's saying. And I'd be intrigued to see if the WCC more or less tries to re-input travel partners. I know that's kind of been a point of discussion, especially when you bring out the somewhat regionality of adding UC Santa Barbara and UC San Diego. Obviously, you have the crosstown guys with the Tritons and Toreros. Now, do they pair like UC Santa Barbara and then put them in a bucket with like LMU and like Pepperdine? So it's kind of hard to place that right now, especially when you have Denver all the way out there in the Mountain Time Zone eventually. But that's not my decision to make.
That's why you add a team like UC Irvine, then you at least have an odd number, and then Denver is kind of like that random pairing. So you at least can have the mix of, well, someone has to get paired with Denver and we can rotate who that pairing is on a year in, year out basis. But I mean, there's a lot that's going to kind of come out of this, a lot more. Like, again, now the WCC seems not necessarily set, but like very comfortable where they are. That they now have 12 teams going into 27-28. You have two schools who are looking to invest on the athletic front, which is what they've wanted. Two that are going to bring pretty good fan bases to add to the mix that's already there. And I mean, this is a brand new era of WCC athletics as a whole. Like the leaving of Gonzaga, Randy Bennett leaving, like no Washington State or Oregon State, like the BYU situation is all like wrapped up and done. Like, there's been a lot of movement over the last 7 years for the league, and it now seems like we have now fully transitioned into kind of what that new era is going to look like. And this is going, at the very least, it will be entertaining. Whether and we will see how all of it starts to shake out with this new look league.
Hey, I love me some drama. I love me some new eras. I love me a lot of what this new WCC is kind of looking like, given what some of the options and some of I guess some of the potential consequences could have been. This is not a bad spot to be in. I think all things considered, I'm largely satisfied with the direction and progress of the league. Now, you mentioned new eras. Not the only new era getting underway. It's USD progressing very well. Torero's hitting the portal under first-year head coach J.R. Blount after he finished his season with Iowa State. And I'm just going to start off with the first one because I love this. We're dealing with an old friend here. Get your Dusty Stromer back on the menu, boys. One of the first commits for USD. And, kind of in and out of the rotation at times at Grand Canyon, especially when you think of his time as like a seventh man for the Zags. I think you look at his offense and the potential there, and you say, look, it's not so difficult to realize why he was such a highly rated recruit in that respect. It's always be the question about how much buy-in can you get consistently on defense and kind of how can you put him in the right spots to win. And I think when you look at a defensive minded head coach in J.R. Blount, I think Dusty will be put in positions to win and succeed. I just think the onus is on how much Stromer applies himself within this defensive system and kind of how he can make himself be as much of a two-way guy as possible. But it's really funny when I texted you about this. I'm like, we got Dusty Stromer back on the menu, back like we never left.
I mean, it's like seeing his name pop up and it being very quick to see his name kind of like be one of the first to have that commit going to USD. It does say something of like just at least the quality of the player that J.R. Blount has been going for. Obviously, again, Dusty Stromer was a former top 50 recruit out of high school. He came in with a lot of hype, and it didn't obviously work all too well at Gonzaga. He didn't get a huge amount of run. Same kind of thing at Grand Canyon, but now kind of a few years into his career, I think it's going to be a little bit more kind of defined of who he is and the type of impact that he could potentially make. Like, this is someone who can shoot the ball, and you're going to have to just put him in spots where he can do just that. I don't think at this point you can expect a ton from him on the defensive end. We've just seen it after a few years that it's kind of who he is at this stage, and not to say that it can't get better, but you're looking at a guy who's going to be able to stretch the floor, give you something on offense, and obviously it's something they need right now. But it's going to be interesting to see kind of obviously as they kind of continue to add to the roster, whatnot, how he fits into the rotation of this new team. And one of the other names that popped up, he actually did have some a pretty good showing against a good team. Antonio Munoz coming over from Grambling State, averaged 12, a little over 12 a game with Grambling. But the big one was he had a 16-point outing, 5 for 9 from the field against Iowa State, which obviously he got to see firsthand. So he was like, you know what? I'm gonna pencil that in. Like, I might have that conversation later. And this is for a sophomore coming in and watching some of the clips of him, like super athletic. So this is someone who's going to be able to attack the basket, play above the rim, and give San Diego a fair amount of athleticism and an ability to get the ball in the basket. And like I think this is a guy that's going to fit really well with J.R. Blount, just based off the little bit I've been able to see through some of the clips.
Yeah, I think you look at that athleticism that pops, and I think you start to salivate, I think, a little bit if you're a San Diego fan. You don't want to count the chickens before they hatch because you still obviously have to play the games. But when you look at some of the archetypes that they brought in, especially some of the balance, you're not just bringing in redundancy of we're not going to bring in 10 St. Mary's 7-footers, and be St. Mary's Redux. Like, I like the fact that they've spread it out the way the roster has been so far, and I still got a ways to go, obviously, in building out the nuts and bolts of the rest of it. But so far, I can't hate on it. You mentioned some of the other Chase Hawley, former Waves commit, getting on, and then there was another one that came out today from Southern California. So J.R. Blount doing a nice job of tagging Southern California as like a region of focus so far. This one out of the prep ranks, Brandon Martinson, who's just recently played at Sierra Canyon. And there have been a lot of good things said about him, especially when it comes to the social media reaction in terms of what he could bring as a winner. And I'm really excited to see kind of how they all acclimate and eventually what that identity, how it looks in terms of when it gets to like preseason camp, when it gets to the scrimmages and such like that. Still a long way to go, but lots to like and lots to be, I think, excited for is probably the best way I can say it for USD.
And there was actually another, I just like saw this one drop as well earlier today, looking at verbal commits. Terry McMorris coming over from Eastern Illinois, 6'7" forward. Again, they're moving quickly in San Diego. This one probably going to have a little bit more of a wing, 7 points, almost 6 rebounds a game. So J.R. Blount is on the move, and he's starting to fill this roster up, and it's going to be exciting to see just kind of what this mix is going to look like, how it's all going to fit together. But we were excited, and a lot of people were excited about what he was going to be able to bring in year one, and just based off of some of the interesting pieces we have seen through the portal over the first week or so. I think we're definitely going to see a different look from the San Diego squad than we've seen in the past, and they're going to, I think it's going to be a lot more entertaining than we've seen over the last few years.
I'm down for that. I think a good San Diego program is one that I think can be really underappreciated in the grand scheme of the WCC ceiling, especially in terms of its market, in terms of kind of the way you can carve a name out for yourself. You look at what San Diego State has done in year out. They're well respected. There are besides the Padres, really, they're arguably San Diego's team, especially when it comes to basketball. So I look at that and I think USD, you have a chance to make a name for yourself. Obviously, you still have UCSD around. You still have the Aztecs barking, but you can find a way to carve out your own path and find a way to carve your own identity. And I think there's potential to do so. So I'm really excited to see what they do. And still, alongside many other teams, starting to build the pieces back or rebuild the pieces back together.
All right. Well, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you are listening to the podcast. Follow along on social media at Unofficial WCC Pod. The Gauchos will be coming to the WCC. Some exciting stuff. So thanks a lot, everybody, for watching, and we will catch you later.